We have Jeff Roorda from Roorda and Associates. Jeff's, as you would know, probably if you've been involved with council financial strategies, been involved with local government nationally for many years, and focuses on this issue of sustainability. Jeff Kennett, ex-Premier of Victoria. Jeff Kennett, Proprietary Limited, Chair of Beyond Blue, ex-President of the Hawthorn Football Club, etc. So he's got a vested interest in the next month in Melbourne. Kaylene, Anne Murphy, who's now a member of Local Government Electoral Review Panel, and we've heard from Anne over the last few days. Councillor Kylie Zanker, who's the Mayor of Yarra Shire, who's keeping control of Ray up there and the feral pets. Chris Meddows-Taylor, ex-Mayor of Central Goldfields Shire Council and consultant to the MAD with the Future of Local Government program. Kaylene, Conrick, Community Services Director at Bayside City Council. And also, as we know, Maryantonett, Flumian, President of the Canadian Institute on Government. I might start off just inviting an opening comment from each member of the panel in 5 or 6 minutes about how they see the challenge of the future for local government in the broader context of the public sector and what we need to do to remain relevant to our stakeholders in the future. So I'll start off with Jeff Roorda, who's studied this particular problem at length for many years. Jeffrey.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon. In a few minutes, I'll set a scene only on the area that is in my area of interest, which is sustainability. Since '98, a series of state and national studies have said that from 30% to 50%, depending on the study, the Australian local government is not financially sustainable, primarily because of infrastructure. I'll give you 3 stories or case studies that illustrate perhaps why leadership is needed at the whole of government level. These are real examples. The first one, and they're across a number of states. The first one is a council that reports consistently $100 million backlog for infrastructure. Their asset management plans say the renewal gap for the next 10 years is $200 million. This council is not a publicly listed company. If they were, they should cease trading. But they're not. They've increased their rates for the last 10 years by 7 to 8% year on year, and they run low to moderate debt profile. Over the last 10 years, they've spent $50 million on additional services and facilities in response to community consultation, where the community, in a series of surveys, said they wanted better services. They have no reserve. The second council, a rural council, reports no backlog, reports no renewal gap in their future infrastructure. They have about 3,000 kilometres of road, about 2,000 of which are unsealed. The councillors have taken the view for a long time that they've been elected to represent the community, and so they don't have a formal community consultation program. Their asset management plans are balanced to their long-term financial plan for the next 10 years, but they do annual service reviews to make sure they're providing a value for money. And one of those service reviews said, we have a very long length of sealed road with about 6 properties because of farm aggregation. Because gravel is cheap for us, it's much cheaper to run an unsealed road than a sealed road. And they've actually taken the decision and implemented a reduction in added value for money, producing an unsealed road because it's cheaper and there's only 6 properties affected. This council happens to adjoin the other council. They have substantial reserves. The third council also has no backlog and no future renewal gap. Their long-term financial plan balances to their asset management plan. And when I had that conversation with that council, I said, surely this can't be right. I know that you've got at least one swimming pool that's getting close to the end of its life, and they had 2 pools. The council said yes. Well, we went through a formal community engagement program and we asked the community, would you like to pay more to refurbish the major pool, or would you like to rebalance services? Most of the community said, we're an ageing community, we think 1 pool's fine, and travelling every 20 minutes is okay with us, we'd rather close the pool than pay more. Those 3 issues raise some very serious questions about a whole of government response to local government sustainability. Is local government sustainable? The 30% or 50% that's in trouble? Some would say yes, but maybe not at the current levels of service. Is cost shifting real? Most would say yes, it's real and consistent. In fact, in some areas, as state governments' budgets become under pressure, in some states the cost shifting is actually increasing. There is no question, if you looked at any of the policy documents, that the management of infrastructure is a whole of government responsibility. But it requires local government to produce consistent and reliable sets of numbers in consultation with communities.
Okay, thanks, Jeffrey. Jeff Kennett, your view on the challenge in the future.
Well, thank you very much. Just following on from Jeff, this issue of financial sustainability is terribly important, and we're now starting to see a number of councils in this state under great pressure. They are right around the country, but I sadly predict it's going to get a lot worse, a lot more quickly. And because councils are answerable to their state governments as opposed to federal governments, there is going to be a lot of pressure put on state governments as to how they're going to manage the broad church of local governments in the years to come. I understand this morning there was a lot of discussion, and I hear what Jeffrey says and the emphasis he put on, no, not necessarily the emphasis, but the number of times he spoke about community consultation. It's a good thing, consultation, as long as there's not too much of it. And you should never allow consultation and the derivatives that come from that in any way put at risk good governance and the need for council laws and working together with their administrators to actually lead to good governance standards. I mean, good governance standards are very simple. We all know what's right and wrong. We know if you take peptides and so forth, you can get yourself into trouble. But the reality is, we know what good governance is all about. A lot of council laws do not adhere to it. And those councils get themselves into trouble. We're seeing that at the moment in Victoria. On the other hand, there are some officers who, for reasons of politics, play a very tough game. We've recently seen the Mayor of Geelong retire, Keith Fagg, good businessman, but in the end, he was desperately trying to bring about growth and change in Geelong through consensus with his other councillors. Doesn't work. He had one guy there who was particularly threatening, and in the end, Keith decided to give it away. So local government isn't an easy task, but I suspect and suggest it's going to get a lot worse and a lot more difficult in the years to come, unless the sorts of things that Jeff is talking about and those asset management sustainability reports should all be done to the same criteria so that you can measure one council against the other, be they performing or not performing. We've got a state election here at the end of the next year. I keep saying to the Minister, if you're not careful, you're going to end up with 24 councils in diabolical trouble. You can't wait back and react. You've got to get in there early. You've got to provide them with the assistance they need. The other thing that worries me greatly about Victorian councils, particularly some of the others in other parts of the country that we work with, is this issue of the superannuation so-called call that you've just had, all of you. Partly it's not the council's fault because the fund hasn't performed as well as it may have, although it's done reasonably well compared to others. But so much of the component for the increase has been about the way in which councillors have allowed their own costs, particularly their employment costs, to grow beyond the norm. And if you continue with that, as sure as night follows day, however you may be reacting to the current calls for contributions, and most councils have borrowed for it, and that then goes back to your capacity to do the infrastructure requirements that your area needs. Be sure as night follows day, there will be another call in 3 years. And in part, not totally, councils will have no one else to blame but themselves. And I would strongly recommend, if I was the Minister or if I was the Premier, can you imagine anything more horrifying? That I would strongly suggest you do not allow your own employment costs to grow above 2% for the next 3 years per annum. Now you might argue 3, I don't, I argue 2. And if that means you've got to get better people, if that means ultimately you're going to have to shed some staff, so be it. But I think councils, the MAB and others, we're going to have to come together very quickly and work with the local government, with the state government, to try and work out how we can prevent another call. This, I think, is the second call you've had in the last few years. A third is just around the corner, unless there is decisive action taken very, very quickly. So, as I look at local government at the moment throughout Victoria, we put the big changes in place 15 years ago. There is this issue that community expectation of and from their council is too high, and council laws and officials have been too willing to give in to the bleatings of those in society who believe they're entitled to something which can't be justified. It's why I argue there should be a review of the roles of government, federal, state and local, so that we can be quite specific what is the role of a local government, what is the role of state and what is the feds, so we don't have the overlapping, so we don't have the cost sharing, wastage, etc. So community expectation, we've got to start pushing back against the public who always want more than they pay for. That's collectively the responsibility of all tiers of government. We keep giving in. Elections come. If there's a prime example, right now, government's an election on Saturday. If I'd been leading one of the parties, I probably would have gone and said we will not commit $1 extra to new expenditure at this time. We can't afford it. We've got a deficit of $30 billion. With one exception, I was responsibly and slowly roll out the National Disability Scheme, which I think over time could be the most important social reform of this century. Outside of that, no new expenditure. And then I'd concentrate on the areas of growth to grow the economy. Now, I was down wearing my hat as chairman of Beyond Blue in the Western District a couple of weeks ago, and I fear for a lot of our rural regional councils where, while in some cases the farming output at the moment is good, in others it's disastrous. There are 40 dairy farms in receivership up for sale in the Western District at the moment. That's going to affect the rate revenue of a lot of councils. It's going to destroy a lot of families. It's going to put at risk a lot of communities. More importantly, in one sense, it might deprive us of having a viable dairy industry 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, but that's another issue. So there are some things within local government's control, there are some things out of it. But community expectation is where I would hope to see leadership from councillors taking a new play and arguing back against this concept that you can provide for everyone and everything. Secondly, I would argue very strongly this issue of how you manage your own books in terms of just recurrent expenditure is going to be critical as to the level of call you're going to have made upon you in 3 years if the managers of your super fund do not in fact break even or better. Because if the salaries go up over 2 or 3%, there will be another call. And in many councils won't have even paid back the money you borrowed to pay this one. So I think that's a real issue. The final thing I would just throw into the mix, which you won't like, but that's all right because I'm not elected by anyone. We did the amalgamations a few years ago because we recognised what we had 150 years ago was no longer relevant to the future. That is, we needed bigger sizes, bigger areas of management, using new technology, etc., etc. If councils, the MAB, if you don't get your own patch in order very quickly, I have no doubt there will be another round of amalgamations. And I say that because there will be so many councils in trouble, there will be no way of actually digging them out of the hole individually. So those who sit above you will be saying, well, how can we best manage this? Well, here's 4 or 5 regional councils, here's a couple of cities. We'll have to bring them together and put in new standards. So what we have today, I thought, was the start and the finish of amalgamations. As I get to better understand the financial viability, the sustainability or lack of sustainability, the failure to provide for infrastructure of many councils at the moment, I'm beginning to think that our round in the 90s was only the first round. So councils and administrators have got to understand the need to get your financial situation under control, your costs under control, work out properly your sustainability requirements and the gap between what is needed, what is there now and what is needed in the future. Otherwise, within 5 years, maybe less, there will be people, and it will be ratepayers, who will be calling for more amalgamations.
Chief? Anne.
One of the great things about democracy is that we're all entitled to our opinions. The great skill, though, lies in being able to coalesce them to achieve your objectives. And we've talked about the relevance of local government, and I think if you took a survey in this room, that you'd find that it probably rates about 90%. Step outside into Collins Street and ask the same question, and you'd be at the lower end of the scale. Survey a group confronted by a multi-unit government in a suburb, once again higher end of the scale. Other users, let's take the skate park kids. Go and ask them about the relevance of local government. They'd say it had no relevance without understanding that local government probably provided the skate park for them. And so that shows a great gap in our capacity to be able to communicate with the utilisers and the people who fund our services. So in taking us forward to the sustainable future that we're talking about, we have to develop engagement strategies that are able to talk to all of our constituents, not just the squeaky wheels that we've been talking about. And we have the opportunity to utilise engagement strategies that are being utilised perhaps in the federal election now, and we all probably laugh at social media. But if we want to engage the relevant groups who are going to formulate the policies and strategies that are going to take local government forward into this 21st century, we have to develop those engagement strategies. And we have to make them aware of the issues that have been talked about by the two Jeffs, because if we don't convey those cost imperatives to our ratepayers and the constituents, they're going to keep demanding better and greater services without understanding the cost imperatives and the noose that it's going to put around council's neck to make it a viable entity. So I think that it's, in terms of sustainability and change, we've got a long way to go. We are really down at the lower end of the scale, except for maybe some of the country councils. And I think Gary, in terms of way it negotiates with capacity, has probably developed a really great model. And there are a lot of lessons that can be learned from them. But translate that to a city environment, and it's less likely to work unless you imposed it on in maybe 10 different times across the municipality like Roorda. So what works for one municipality may not necessarily work for another, but we can take lessons from what everyone else. And I think that's why a forum like this, where we come together and share ideas, is a great opportunity. And if we want to talk about, like some of the people on the panel this morning, who talked about the Local Government Act defining our capacity to do certain things, well, I just want to urge you all to have a grassroots go at the electoral reform panel and put in your submissions either as a council or as an individual, because it's a great way to be able to inform what's going to happen in the 21st century for your councillors and how they're elected.
Thanks, Anne. Kylie?
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kylie Zanker and I'm Mayor of the Maryantonett Shire. I won't go on with the stats as previously delivered by our CEO about our towns from our shire, but I will just explain how I explain to people where we are. We're a rural shire, and I always get asked, where's that and how do you spell it, as the common thing. So generally I say we're the rectangle between Horsham Rural City and Mildura, and we're the best bit. So yeah, I'm biased and I'm really proud to admit that. Sorry. So we don't have parking meters, huge shopping strips, traffic jams, no traffic lights. So, but what we do have, and the one thing that I love to spruik that we have, and that's community spirit. I'm biased and passionate about that too, but I believe that that's what is going to propel us forward when we're looking for the future. So we're talking about the challenge of the future and change and being able to transform and sustainability. And you know, quite often our council is, as been mentioned here, one of the smaller ones that is rural and it isn't sustainable, and that makes the hair on my neck prickle so much. And the reason behind that is our community, like I've said before, all of our communities across our small townships, they're really resilient, they are really positive, and they are so engaging. And it is, I believe, that community spirit and that engagement that will transform and help us move forward. Our communities are really mindful of the fact that this is the bucket of money that we have, and we have this much to do with it. So you talk to us, work with us, partner up and work out what's the priority for you. And an example I can think off the top of my head is our farmers. As farms have gotten bigger, as Jeff has said, quite often not all of those roads are needed anymore. So where there used to be four smaller blocks, there's one large one now. So in consultation with those farmers, we don't actually grade and maintain all of those roads around there, just the main link roads that get there. That's how our communities look at being sustainable and being able to move into the future. And I really think that if local government is going to be there and going to be relevant in the future, like the question asked, we can do that by embracing those challenges. For our communities, a challenge is just an opportunity that they get to explore. And so many times when I go out and meet with our communities and we have community consultations, they'll be asking and saying that this is what we want. And rather than saying, how can you give it to us as council, they say, tell us how we can do it. How can we work with you to make that happen? And I think, like Anne mentioned, the difference between a rural council and also a city council is, and I don't want to offend anyone by saying this, we've often had to bat for ourselves for a while. We've had to stand on our own feet, and the funds haven't always been there. So we're used to that partnership thing. It works well. Phil Shanahan also commented that ratepayers vote with pictures and candidate statements and often don't know the person. And I truly don't believe that in my municipality. I can honestly say that 90% of the people within my ward I know. And I do think that's a bonus. That's an amazing positive that we have and can harness to move forward with that change. So because I know those people, I can talk easily, openly and freely, and I can discuss with them. And I also know most of the people are a generous amount within the other towns across our municipality. So that has downsides. I can't go to the footy without being inundated by people, but I love that. Otherwise I wouldn't have taken on this role, and that's why I'm so passionate. People question and critique and engage with me within every role and walk of life regularly. And an example that came to me about how much our communities know and want to move forward with that change was around constitutional recognition. I wasn't getting those questions about how can it affect us, why do we need it. The feedback I was getting from my community was, okay, we know it's going to do this and how it's going to help us, so that's why we vote yes. Like the information, they'd already sought that out, so it was already that partnership of how they could support the council so that we could deliver the services and what they needed. So in reflection, I honestly think that the danger and challenge for local government is ensuring that our communities are encouraged and prompted and have a voice. I think, we need to let the experts of the communities lead the way, and whether that be the squeaky wheel, as mentioned earlier, or the quieter people. So from speaking from my experience about my shire, our communities are passionate, they're resilient, they're engaging, and they do have that can-do attitude. They're basically just there waiting. They have the ideas and the strategies, they just need the partnership of council to make it work. So I often reflect and think that our communities are basically the artists, and they're waiting for council to supply their paints so they can paint their pictures. Thank you.
Thanks, Kylie. Chris Meddows-Taylor.
Thanks very much, John. Someone once said change is very much like the Billy Graham crusades of yesteryear, that people went along to those and, follow the path of righteousness, but next day sin looked good. And very attractive. And change is a bit like that. We can come along to really engaging sessions like the last couple of days and be incredibly motivated by hearing so many good speakers and interaction. But going back, we just fall into the usual ways. It all gets very hard what to do, how to put it all in place. And that's what I just want to focus on in the couple of moments. I think we're all fairly clear from the discussions we've had, from our own understanding, from past future local government conferences, that massive pressure of change which John summarised his introduction. Quite clearly, the governments, federal and state governments, will be driving through massive change agendas and will need to connect with communities to get them engaged and to engage with them about how that change plays out. We are going to be key to that, but getting that right and that value-added key, it relates around governance and getting the governance piece absolutely right. So connected government and our role in that is absolutely key. We've talked about change the other way from engaged communities. Of course, not everyone has that level of engagement straight up. Some communities are still dealing with low levels of participation. Some councils have to deal with both, where they've got some parts of their community that still are not very engaged, others demanding high levels of engagement. One of the things, and certainly the Jeffs touched on them, that the challenges of councils, I think the change challenges are different for municipal, for metropolitan and regional municipalities, but very extensive in both. Clearly, as both Jeffs have mentioned, in regional councils and regional municipalities, obviously the key issue, financial sustainability, is a major issue. We've talked about that. Also, I think the cost of technologies, we talked about technology before, we said it was an important thing before lunch. The cost of new technologies to meet new services, to drive new ways of collaboration and new cost-effective services, often very expensive. How those things are afforded when already we're in financial trouble. One thing, certainly looking at the local government reform agenda, capability, if you look at New South Wales, Queensland and overseas, sourcing of capability so that we can make sure that Kylie and her shire and other shires have access to the capabilities that they need to support the range of services. Getting those capabilities, sharing those capabilities is a key issue. And I think increasingly looking at where we've got in regional Victoria growth and also population decline, how we can look at ways of perhaps redressing some of that imbalance and working collaboratively will be big issues. So collaboration is going to be a key across sharing of services, ways of engagement and delivery. In metropolitan areas, clearly, I think the rise globally of competitive cities, positioning of cities, and working through that myriad of complexities around transport planning, cross-boundary issues, so massive issues around the growth of cities that metropolitan municipalities face. So the pressure of change certainly there, and certainly not surprising, the last two Future of Local Government conferences last year and this year see developing change capability the biggest priority. Just then, in a few words, what about change? What is it? Let's make it really simple, cut to 3 words. And the 3 words, because there are lots of change models out there, the 3 words I think that help us understand change are awakening, envisaging and re-architecting. That comes to some work done with General Electric and a guy called Jack Welsh who led that company in the last part of the 20th century. Awakening is about sessions like this, and the MAV and John Hennessy deserve massive amounts of credit for keeping these issues up with us so we can come and debate them and understand them. At the local level, we have to engage with our communities. As Anne was saying before, we need to talk to them about issues of financial sustainability. We need to get out that awakening process that it's just not okay. We need to have those conversations. People need to understand the imperative that things are just not okay the way they are. And then, of course, once that happens, we've got to do the envisioning part or envisaging about the way forward. A game plan. We've talked about game plans here. what does a game plan look like? Certainly at a council level, focusing on the council plan being a strategic document. The view this morning is most of the council plans are. We put a fair bit of work with that. We work with CT, one of Jeff Kennett's companies, to do some work on that, to try and make it a more strategic document, to try and look not only at a wish list for what councillors want to do, but the gaps that we need to close economically, financially, socially within a community to make it a more strategic document. Regionally or cross-boundary, we've got great opportunities for collaboration, looking at ways of service delivery, looking at using things like regional strategic plans, regional growth plans, and metropolitan planning strategies that evolve to look at ways of that collaboration. Sector-wide, we've talked about the need to have an overall game plan, particularly to get that connected government bit right and position our sector right. Again, hearing what Jeff Kennett said, I mean, if we don't do it and get it right, others will. Hasn't that always been the history of local government? So the game plan issue of envisaging, but then the second bit I'd just say is really important. We talked about yesterday the issue of what capabilities perhaps councillors need. We do need to think about new visionary leadership styles. That mayors and councillors, elected people need to go out, they need to champion the new vision, they need to champion the way of the future, they need to engage passionately, they need to motivate others to be part of that process. That set of visionary capabilities, not unique to local government, but to all leaders going forward is a key piece. And then finally, the re-architecting, and Maryantonett spoke about yesterday about the whole issue of alignment. As we put the pieces in place to make these things happen, to implement our game plans, we need to connect things thoughtfully. We need to get the culture right. For instance, just the whole issue of regional collaboration, working between councils, is a hugely difficult area because our culture needs to support that collaboration. So getting the pieces right, getting the culture supported needs to be right. It needs to be aligned. Maryantonett said yesterday about the issue that alignment supports good governance. I'd actually add to that. I not only support that, but I'd go one step further. Alignment supports our capacity to accelerate change, because the two things we want to do to finish, we want to speed the pace of change because that means that we can make more progress faster, but we need to build change readiness. That is, we need to engage with others in our community. We need to give them the same passion as we have. We need to get them as leaders of change, and we need to get them working with others to take that change process forward in an aligned way. That is the challenge of change. That's what we need to do to have a transformative situation where strategy and culture align and future sustainability.
Thank you, John. I guess anything that doesn't add value to our lives is potentially surplus or irrelevant. So it reminds me of a very sobering conversation I had with a friend of mine after the last elections. And this fellow, he's in his late 40s, 3 children, primary school to teenagers. He's got an international business, highly successful. I cycle with him. He cycles ahead. We meet for coffee and we talk about things. And we were talking about the election, the local government elections. And I was talking about the directly elected mayor of Geelong. And he said, yes, I voted for... Who did I vote for mayor? And I said, you didn't. He said, yes, I voted for the mayor. And I said, no, you didn't. He said, I'm sure I voted for the mayor. And he was nowhere near Geelong. He had no idea what he had voted for, why he was voting, or who he had voted for. And this fellow is a really smart fellow. So how irrelevant was local government to him? So it was really sobering, and I've thought a lot about it, I've laughed a lot about it with him, but I've also thought a lot about it and what that actually means. And for me, at the heart of that is a question about how we are having conversations with our community about the value we provide. I think there's a real disconnect. I don't think there's an understanding in the community about the legitimate things that we provide value for and the unintended consequences that are also valuable. So the things that we're doing. So building on all this morning's conversations around it's important to have good conversations and community engagement, but also there's a real leadership role in there for local government. If we think about the changing environment and we think about the aged care reforms, we're heading for major change around our HAC services. And some councils will see that as an opportunity to get out of HAC, and that's absolutely legitimate, considering the cost HAC services takes away from our funding. But there's also a question about what's then the role of local government with aged care services. What's the space that we have to claim? And if no other, we have to claim the community governance space. And I don't think we've done that particularly strongly in the past, and this is an opportunity to do it now. If we can't claim that space, why are we existing? What are we there for? It's really important that we show leadership now with this changing environment. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. And finally, Maryantonett, you're here from Canada for the week. Has the experience been what you expected, or have you been a bit surprised by what you found?
No, it's been a great experience, and being a political junkie, it's great to be here during the week of the election. I'm sorry I get on a plane as the voting starts, so I will have to wait till I get off a plane 32 hours later to actually find out the results. But there you are. So it's been a great week of learnings, and I look forward to tomorrow and the service transformation workshop as well. John, you've left me with a sense of I don't want to have to repeat myself, so I'm going to try not to. But in terms of the challenge of the future, I want to speak quickly to two global phenomena, and then I just want to talk about what the challenges are. The two global phenomena that I want to speak to, and I think one is as true of Canada as it is of Australia. In our psyche, in our television programs, in our literature, there is nothing that's almost more important than the importance of place. And place and where we're from is the way we always identify ourselves, and is kind of the basis of why local government exists and why local governments exist. So what does that mean, and why are these times exciting? These times are exciting because regardless of what happens in the electoral outcome by the end of Saturday, the big public dialogue that has to occur, and it has to be forced to occur, and local governments and their leadership have a role to play in it, are the roles and responsibilities of different levels of government. And the reason I say that is because if you combine the importance of place with the fact that the global trend is that more and more services are being downloaded to local governments, that is a global trend. Whether Australia's escaped it for the moment or not, I don't know, but you're a long way off, but eventually we all kind of look the same on those global phenomena. If more services will be transferred to the local level, that will also be pushing more consolidation. It's not only because some will get into trouble financially, it's because the way citizens expect services to be delivered to them requires a whole bunch of things to happen in this chain of change. So I think those are all connected. This notion of the importance of place, the role of government, and the role of local government enforcing the discussion about what the whole of government response is. Is it to create so much airtight silos between the levels that citizens look at us and say, "You got to be kidding"? Or is it an understanding that through that collaboration that others have talked about on this panel, we actually are going to be rebuilding something different? So that's one phenomenon. The second phenomenon is technology, which brings speed and transparency to everything we do in ways that I don't think is quite appreciated. And I can say, you're not going to believe this, a young kid like me, but I'm probably as old as just about anybody in the room. And what I'm amazed by in the discussions of the last 2 days is, well, you got to get with the program. There are a few people who've spoken in the earlier panel before lunch, some are older, some are younger, who kind of get the concept of why technology is transforming what we're talking about. At its heart, the changes in technology are intended, by their very definition, to be highly disruptive. We can't control them in the way we think we can control them. We can't be afraid of them because not using them means we control them. That's a fallacy that many test at their own peril. But the important thing for what we do for citizens, I would capture this way. In the past, what governments did, including local governments, was average the needs of citizens. That's what programs are, right? We kind of say, well, the average is, and since we're going to treat everybody the same way, we're going to hold everybody to that average. The combination of those style programs with the combination of technology, which at its heart allows a tremendous personalization of the relationship between me and anything else I want to communicate with is so profoundly transformational of what's happening around us that I don't think we quite capture it, because we're like fish to water. And by the way, the cost of embedding this stuff in what we do, 10 years ago it was a fortune. Today it's cloud and web based, which means for most cases it's almost free. So that's an excuse we used to use that is no longer available to us. So I think we have to get on with that. So this need for individualization, combined with this notion of a place I belong to, continue to push things towards local governments. And let me say one thing about consultation, because we've used it in positive and negative ways today, and I just want to say one thing. Consultation is not like, I was trying to think of an example, so here's my example, let's see if it works. It's not like a Ouija board. We all know what a Ouija board is, right? So why have I used that example as I was racking my brain over the noon hour? Here's a Ouija board, my definition. Everybody holds it, nobody controls it, and it spells a lot of obscenities. Does that work? It works. Okay. So my point of consultation is you always have to go into a consultation knowing what it is you're asking people to engage for. Otherwise, you keep crossing in some netherworld where nothing's ever going to happen except that you get mad and citizens get mad. That takes me to why frameworks matter, why they're legislated, why there are different kinds of frameworks. I do believe that you've got a real role to play in trying to figure out through events like these and other dialogue you'll participate in, and what those frameworks are that can work at the level of generality for absolutely everybody. And if they're good frameworks that are values-based, not compliance-based in my judgment, then they get applied at the local level in a way that makes sense for those communities. So those are my two quick global phenomena. Then let's just quickly run through the challenge of the future. Like a lot of people here, in my judgment, the challenges are twofold: relevance and sustainability. And you can use those threads to talk about just about anything cities or local governments do. By the way, a lot of local governments are reinventing themselves. The good thing would be if all those levels of government were reinventing themselves together in a dialogue that works towards the same purpose of what citizens would like from us. Successful places at local levels are doing it constantly because that's what's required of us. I commented to someone over the noon hour as well that in my tour of Melbourne yesterday, I was struck by how many communities I traveled through. The ones I saw, the ones that are vibrant, that's a reinvention. I'm sure that was not the case many years ago as we watched all these tall towers go up. There may be communities inside those towers that are as dynamic, but in terms of the cityscape, the streetscape, we didn't see it. And we know that something's happening right here because it's the most livable city in the world. The economy is a whole new ballgame. It's not what it used to be. If 3D printing is going to do what manufacturing, what some people claim it will be, it'll be a whole new game in terms of what happens in local economies. So local governments need to retool, to connect with citizens in a different way, to learn how to govern in these new ways, and to be able to pay for what you need to do, because there's much that's needed in these communities. So the issue of sustainability is financial, but it's more than financial. So what are your revitalization strategies going to be? And that's the way you should think about it. It is revitalization in the case of most communities and governments. The innovation landscape is also changing. You can avail yourself of many more things, from the smart technologies that are embedded in infrastructure, to the use of data, to how you use that data to have informed citizens help you come to different decisions. And always be conscious, as many people on this panel have already said, of bridging the gap between your citizens and the various levels of government, because there's a duty there to translate what happens at various levels in a way that's important. Because as I said, there will be more consolidation, so you have to be actively engaged in that discussion. A few points around transparency. Transparency is important not only in terms of values and behavior, but as I said a moment ago, about how data gets used and how data is made available to the community to help drive both engagement and the way decisions are made. And finally, professionalism and the professionalization of this entire level of local government. Events like these discussions that I've heard about in terms of shared services and the ability for shaping those frameworks at a level where you can all learn from each other, fundamental. A real exploration about what the future service landscape looks like. What will citizens expect from us and how will we measure up? All of those things will enhance the decision-making that I talked about. Remember the one thing I said from yesterday that I will constantly repeat? My three who's. Who has power, who has a voice in decision-making, and who is accountable. And there are lots of people who don't hold jobs with fancy titles that have a lot of power out there when they want to come together. So if we've gone through the challenges, the real challenge now is reinventing the future. What is the value proposition that Kaylene spoke about? That is what citizens are looking for, a modern day expression for local government to state what that value proposition is. And in my judgment, it's a far more professionalized model, also a participatory model. So when the whole of government response comes home to roost, it'll come home to roost at the local level with a vengeance, because the importance of place is something that binds us all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Maryantonett. Just before we throw out the questions, a couple of very quick activities. Jeff, just in 60 seconds, just with all your experience with hundreds of councils across Australia about sustainability, if you had to pass on one piece of advice about what every council should be doing to improve their long-term sustainability, what would it be? What's the minimal thing that they must do to maximise their longer-term sustainability?
Have a forward expenditure plan for the next 10 years that balances with your long-term financial plan of how much money you've actually got, so that you've got a forward position that balances. Then work out what does that mean for service levels and risk. Make sure council and community understands what those service levels and risks are.